Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're, of course, going to have another incredible episode for you guys. So sit back and enjoy. We got a couple of different topics to tackle today. The first topic we're going to tackle today are the Twitter files, and really Elon Musk takeover of Twitter. I think most of you guys are probably aware of what the Twitter files are and what they're about. But in just a quick summary, the Twitter I'm wanting to call the Twitter fires, having some pronunciation problems today. The Twitter files are pretty important. A lot of the liberals are trying to discount them, saying, oh, we already know this stuff. This is all a nothing burger. They're just so excited about the idea that they want to tweet out Hunter Biden's dick without censorship, because that was a big part of the Twitter files part one, is that it talked about the censorship of Hunter Biden material, which the left, of course, just turned it into they were trying to censor revenge pornography against Hunter Biden of some sort, even though there was a lot more information about Hunter Biden, not just his dick pics, as we all know. And they try to mitigate it and minimize and say that it's no big deal at all, and you should just move on, which is not the case at all. The Twitter files are very important. They show that, once again, Twitter executives, and this is probably reflective of social media and big tech in general, is that they had a close working relationship with the federal government. The federal government was advising them to take down stuff, take down materials, censor. And not only were they working with the federal government, they were working with Joe Biden and the Democratic Party to censor more. That's very important. It also shows that they were shadow banning, reducing the reach of conservative posts and posts that they did not like. And it also showed that Jack Dorsey really wasn't running the company. It was really Yoel Roth and Vijaya Gad, as we want to say. A lot of these people need some American names, but Vijaya Gad were the people who were running this organization, not Dorsey. Dorsey was kind of busy off doing Buddhist retreats or whatever he was into, dropping psychedelics. I don't know. He was not really there. And he also really opposed some of the stuff. But, these were the people running the company. He felt intense pressure to do it. They were always lobbying to censor more, to take off Trump. And so this is what happened. And also showed the close collaboration that went on and the process that went about to take Trump off Twitter, and how they really relish this idea that they could take off important politicians and heads of state through their power. So I think this is all very important, and I'm glad that Elon Musk is bringing attention towards it. And I think this is showing the white pill that is Elon Musk's Twitter. We've had a lot of black pills lately, but I think a big white pill is what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter. I mean, a lot of people are coming back. There is a lot more freedom on the site. There's not as much censorship. They've gotten rid of a lot of their content moderation teams, so people have been able to speak freely more often on Twitter. The experience is a little bit better. There are a few weird things about new Twitter. I'm seeing a lot more ads, even though the ad problem, I think, got reduced early last week. Pretty much every third tweet was an ad, and it was like a weird ad. It's like for like some scam product, and it's like, why? This is just flooding my timeline. The other weird thing is that now you will see people you don't follow. You'll see their tweets there, and they'll be like, why are you seeing this person? It's like, well, two people you follow this person. And Twitter, before Elon Musk took over, you would see tweets of, some people like this. Like if multiple people liked a tweet, you would see that. But now you will see even more of those tweets. It's a little... the real annoying part is like to just random tweets from people you don't follow, and nobody liked their tweets, but you're just seeing it anyway. And like, I'm tired of seeing this person. I don't follow them for a reason. But you see that. But otherwise, it's much greater improvement. We're seeing a ton of people come back that were banned, and they're all coming back and able to speak freely. Some people are not being allowed back, and there are some people who are getting suspended and banned. So there's still some kinks to work out, but I think it is moving in a positive direction. And, liberals are losing their minds over this. They do feel that they're losing control over social media. And I think the Elon Musk example can provide, I'm using example twice in one sentence, but can provide an example to Facebook and other social media platforms of how to deal with censorship, and maybe that they'll be less censorious going forward if Twitter can get away with it than that. And also, all the advertisers are returning back. A lot of the boycott threats are turning out to be nothing. And even liberals are saying, I'm leaving Twitter, and they don't leave Twitter. They keep tweeting. It would be nice if some of them left Twitter, but of course, none of them can quit. They'll make a big deal about, I'm going to Mastodon, and then a week later, they're back to tweeting. There's several people who are saying, I'm done tweeting, and pretty much all those people, I've seen them back on Twitter. So they're not even following their own advice. This is very similar to whenever a Republican president would win. Liberals are saying, I'm moving to Canada. They never moved to Canada, so it's the same here. So while the new Twitter may not be the absolute perfection that we would like, it's far better than what it was before, and it'll probably get better over time. And it really is creating I guess you would say, a meta-political moment for the country and how we deal with free speech and who's with free speech. And now Elon Musk is interested in using his platform to promote a lot of our ideas. Are some more normie conservative ideas, but that's still moving in the right direction. He's talking about prosecuting Fauci. I think most people would agree with that stuff. He's really attacking wokeness and political correctness and censorship. And I think all that stuff is good. So I think it has met most of my expectations. I was always cautiously optimistic about what an Elon Musk Twitter would be like. And I think it's met, in some cases, it exceeded my expectations. And I think it is really delivering on the promise we thought that a Musk Twitter would be, is that it would have more freedom, it would be less censorious, it would be a step in the right direction, it would make liberals mad, and it would create this conversation that we can now drive the national discussion. I think it's going to be important if we have a free speech Twitter, going into the 2024 election. That's going to be a big deal. And I would say that if Facebook, I cited this previously, but I think if Twitter is successful with its free speech model, I think Facebook will be more inclined to follow that. Maybe not to the same extent as Twitter, but it will. I don't know about YouTube because they're run by Google, but and a lot of these tech executives have had enough of being bullied around by these leftists. I mean, like Bezos, Zuckerberg, and even Dorsey when he was there, we're not like the stereotypical liberals as a lot of their staffers. A lot of these guys were just there to, run a business, quasi-libertarian views. And, they're not really, they've had some questioning about woke stuff, but they were really held hostage by their employees, as was seen in the Twitter files with Dorsey and the people who were really running the company, which was Vijay Gad and Yoel Roth. So they were there. But now with Elon Musk buying it, and he fires these people, and he's in total control, and he's fully with free speech, and he's running a much tougher shop against these people than Dorsey did, and it's reversing that. So if you really one of the solutions, we've thought of all these ideas to deal with text censorship, revising Section 230, which to explicitly say, for those who don't know, Section 230 is a part of the Communications Decency Act, which offers these tech platforms protection from our liability protections, our publisher immunity protections, which say if somebody posts something that somebody considers libelous on a social media platform, the social media platform would be protected from liabilities over that. Unlike a publisher, they're not treated as a standard publisher. And in part, the reason why they're treated not as a standard publisher is that they are considered a neutral forum where a variety of opinions are discussed. Of course, we know that's not true. And these publishers, and sometimes in court, they'll claim that they're publishers. Even if they are claiming that they're publishers, that would eliminate their Section 230 protection, which they very much value because they could not operate as social media platforms without it, because they get facing lawsuits every day. I still think that should be revised, and I think most conservatives are like that, but it shows that there's not as going to be as great of impetus to do that because Elon Musk is providing the platform that pretty much all conservatives want and have set the model for it. And really, maybe the model is just getting wealthy billionaires who hate wokeness just to take over a tech company, fire all the libtard staff, and then run it with an iron grip. That may just be the solution rather than a government intervention or having the government nationalize or manage these platforms, which I don't think they're going to do. But there were some ideas about having, a type of review board from the government to ensure that they're complying with Section 230 and then stripping them of Section 230 status if they're found to be too censorious. And as we see, with people saying the government can't get involved in this, as we see from the Twitter files, the government was already heavily involved, and the Democrat Party just telling Twitter what to censor, and Twitter would be like, absolutely. And if you had the Facebook files or whatever, you'd probably see the same thing. So it's not like that, but already we're seeing that it's had a lot of difficulty getting to that solution because, you have to pass legislation. You can't pass any legislation on this matter. And Democrats and Republicans are divided on the Section 230 matter, which Democrats want to eliminate it and turn them into publishers, so they only publish liberal ideas and liberal views, and that's it. And they censor hate speech, while conservatives want to revise it to allow for more free speech. So big difference on how they want to reform that law and the laws surrounding big tech. So there's been several other ideas too, like the antitrust stuff, which doesn't address the censorship, and it has resulted in alliances with far left progressives who want more censorship and want to eliminate hate speech from the internet. One of these government officials, Lena Khan, is like that, which she's a huge libtard progressive who is very much anti-free speech, but for some reason conservatives are like, she's base because she wants to do antitrust, which antitrust may have some point, but it doesn't solve our primary issue with big tech, which is the censorship. And it could, in fact, encourage it, as if liberals are behind drawing up the legislation and framework for how antitrust legislation works. They may insist that these companies, if they're broken up, they all, whatever parts that they're broken up to, that they all stand up against hate speech and misinformation. But much better than that idea is just allowing someone like Elon Musk to buy the platform and run it on a free speech model. So that is changing of how a lot of conservatives are viewing the big tech problem. I think there's going to be a much less of a desire to use antitrust models and use government intervention against big tech, which I still think that they should revise Section 230, and maybe if a Republican president was in charge, you could have some type of review council. But all those things, if Democrats are in control of, they're going to demand more censorship and put more pressure on these platforms to end free speech, as we see from the Twitter files, which you have to realize that a lot of the impetus to censor does not come from these tech executives. It does not come from the billionaires or the plutocrat class or whatever you want to call it. It comes from their own employees, and it comes from the government. And I think that's something to keep in mind when you're going about what does Republicans do in response to the Twitter files. I think the most important nugget here is the collusion between the federal government and these companies, and which seems to be a violation of the First Amendment. Is like, why are these federal agencies, why is the FBI, why is the DOJ advising them what to censor? That raises some pretty serious constitutional matters. And I do think that Republicans have a chance to reform that, to hold hearings and to really expose that material for the rest of the country. They can subpoena them for, interactions with Facebook, with Google, with Amazon, with all these major tech platforms, and find out what they were requesting to censor, what was their role with this in pushing for Donald Trump to be censored, and all these to be basically banned from the internet after January 6th, even though he's been allowed to come back in many places. They can do this through these House committees. And I think this is a very important matter, and I think that they can exert some pressure, and I think the next Republican president can do more to reform these reform these tendencies to go and put their finger on the button. And also you have to remember is that a lot of this stuff was done while Trump was president. And now everyone would be like, Trump was so weak. How did he not have his own like Trump service to combat this? And the one thing about Trump is that the institutions were so hostile to him. And after, and as I always use the example, and I think this would be the similar case with a lot of Republicans, unless they really went in at the first start and tried to make reforms, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long, drawn out battle, a very tough battle, but it must be done. But with Trump, with this impression of Trump, they think he's like so weak, and just like any Republican would have gone in there and told the FBI they're fired, and not only that, they're going to be put in prison camps immediately, just with the touch of it, with the dash of a pen, they're out. And the media would just like, oh well, we don't want to be arrested either, and it's like, oh, CNN, they're going to the same prison camp, and just people think that a president could do this, and theoretically, a liberal president could do this if they had all the institutions on their side to promote this and cheer it along, and the courts were there to approve it. It's just not going to happen, and there's just not enough people to enact these policies. Is that a huge problem with personnel in these type of spaces like the presidential administration? A huge problem is that we don't have enough people who are able to hit the ground running and get this. And Trump did hire like a lot of these people, and a lot of these people were like young. A lot of them were just not familiar with the government, and a lot of like these careerist libtards were able to manipulate the bureaucracy and manipulate these staffers, because a lot of the Trump appointees didn't know what they were doing. And you saw this especially with the FBI and DOJ and them just doing whatever they want and encouraging the censorship of Trump and his allies while he was president. And, some people want to say, well, maybe you should have done something like that. But it's also like, who is going to go after these people? Like, he didn't have enough loyal people around him. And as you can see now, all the people who are complaining about him were like, oh, I should have hired me. And then it's like, you want him in jail. It's like, you tweet about him like he's the ex-girlfriend who broke your heart every day. I don't know, baby, if you should have appointed you to this job, because you may have been encouraging him to, the Twitter to censor because you were just, I don't know, mad at him for some reason. So they didn't have that loyal personnel around him. And I also want to say is like, I always bring up this example when the 2020 riots happened. There was a sort of coup-like atmosphere against Trump. The military refused his orders. They refused his orders to deal with the riots. He had to rely on, these Border Patrol agents and these prison guards being sent up to D.C. by Bill Barr to protect him. And there was like this very chaotic moment where he didn't have control of the federal government, where the FBI and the military were taking a knee before the rioters, and he had to rely on these random people, these random agents from many parts of the federal government to come and protect the White House. And the military essentially said, if you try to do anything, we're going to not do it. And that's a big deal. And then January 6th, he was effectively couped. They told him he has no power, and this likely turns out the federal government gave the okay to Twitter and Facebook and everyone else to take him off the internet, which effectively, dethroned him as president. So there's always been that problem. But I think, Republicans, if they come at this from a serious angle and are committed to a long, drawn-out battle, I think that they can make serious reforms on this. And I think that this is a productive matter. But some people, have already gone to the wild, fantastic notions of and demanding Republicans do this, even though it's complete fantasy to expect them to do this. There is a tweet I saw. I quote tweeted this, and I'm not trying to hate on the person who quote tweeted this. I'm just saying we can have disagreements and we can discuss these disagreements. This is not a declaration of war against this person. So I just want to preface this. This person is Pedro Gonzalez, who, he said a lot of good things, but sometimes, not everyone says good. Sometimes people miss, and sometimes we can discuss how they miss and use that as a launch pad to discuss other topics. So this is not me singling out Pedro Gonzalez, but I think this demonstrates a certain tendency on the Twitter right that I see a lot. And he had this tweet where he's saying it got a lot of engagement. I think it got like 22 20,000 likes or 23,000 likes. And it was saying that, if Republicans want to prove they're serious, they have to put Joel Roth and Jack Dorsey in prison. And this is the only way they can be serious. And if they don't do that, they are showing that they're fundamentally unserious. When I saw this now, I agree with the sentiment. Well, I don't agree with the sentiment about Dorsey. I mean, Dorsey was just kind of goofball, like letting Joel Roth and Vijaya Gad run the show. And so, Gad and Roth are more of the bigger problems than Dorsey. But, I understand why and Joel Roth may be involved in some other illegal activity based on some of his other tweets and PhD thesis. But that's another topic. On the topic at hand, can the GOP arrest Twitter executives? Or is there anyone to pressure the arrest of Twitter executives? And the question is no, or the answer is no. You have to look at this. First off, what is the crime they're accused of? The crime would be that they censored on behalf of the advice of the federal government. The federal government is not going to arrest them for, hey, you know how we told you to censor more? We've decided that's a crime now, and we're arresting you for following our orders. I don't think that's the case. Also, it's like, what crime did they commit? You could say election interference, but election interference is like a very narrow, specific category that you're trying to prevent the votes. It's like saying, let's look at from the Ricky Vaughn case, which he was wrongly accused of that, which he did a prank saying like, text to vote. And they said that's an election interference. It has to be something with the nature of voting. If Twitter is using its platform to say, these polls are closed, don't text by voting, and Twitter is a much bigger platform than, say, Ricky Vaughn. And Ricky Vaughn was obviously doing a prank, which a lot of other people did similar pranks from the Democrats, but of course they did not get arrested by the federal government. It has to be something of like that they interfered with people voting through intimidation or lying, deceit, something of that matter. Withholding information from their platform would not, even though it's wrong, would probably not amount to a criminal offense. It'd be saying that the fact that the New York Post or the New York Times did not give enough information to the Hunter Biden story, that they were guilty of election interference. They're guilty of election interference in the non-legal sense. In the bigger picture, that yes, that election interference, that was a form of election interference. Is in the legal sense, it is not. It is not a criminal offense. You could maybe say that, but I don't know if you want to do that, because once again, any time of an expansion of laws where we think that we're going to arrest libtards for, the federal government would just use to arrest like the right for posting information they don't like. It's like saying, oh, you're talking about a border crisis where 200,000 migrants are coming across. You're not mentioning that they got detained, and that's misinformation, so we're arresting you for election interference. That would be the type of way that they'd use the laws. Withholding information from a public platform or hiding it isn't a crime. It's wrong. It's something important. It definitely probably had an effect on the election, but it is not something that is a criminal offense in the legal system. You're not going to prove that they interfere with the election. And if you're saying that they interfere with the election, then it's the same type of stuff. It's the same type of stupidity. Well, I wouldn't say it's stupidity, because there is a point there, but think about how they talked about how Russia hacked the election due to a few shitty memes that they posted on Facebook. And they actually try to act on some of that. Some of it was because of foreign agents and wrong information, but I try to act on that. Now you could say, well, whatever the law states, the liberals use the law, whatever means they have. So we can use it in the same way. It's like, well, the bad news is the Biden administration controls the DOJ. The GOP only controls the House. The House of Representatives cannot issue arrest warrants, at least for something of that sort. I'd have to look. Maybe there's some deep technicalities with, they do have some legal power. I mean, they do have the power to subpoena, and, refusing to follow subpoenas can result in criminal charges, as seen by Steve Bannon. But in types of, doing the type of legal work or law enforcement that the FBI does. The GOP House can't do that, and they have a very narrow majority where a lot of their members, unfortunately, would not go along with that type of maneuver. So I don't know. It's like, so you're essentially, when you're arguing for these arrests, you are arguing for GOP lawmakers to personally arrest them, to do citizens arrest, because there is no other mechanism for arresting them. As I said, the DOJ, the feds are not going to arrest Twitter executives for following their own directives. And, there's not going to be any pressure exerted on them because they're controlled by Biden. If there was a Republican administration, you could see them launching some type of federal investigation into this. I think that would be a realistic expectation or a realistic demand to make of a Republican administration to do such. But there is no, the DOJ is not going to investigate is not going to arrest them for what there is their own wrongdoing, or what their wrongdoing that they encouraged. And the House GOP just doesn't have the juice to push the DOJ to do anything about this, especially when there's, ambiguous at best legal wrongdoing committed here. Think about the Durham investigation, where they found real wrongdoing done by the DOJ, by federal officials involved with Russiagate and all these things. They found actual crimes. Was anyone really convicted? No, nobody was. There's no real criminal charges. They're expecting all these criminal charges, and hardly anyone got convicted. And I think even out of all those people who did wrongdoing, who mishandled information, who fraudulently used information, and all those type of bad things that they did, only one guy got a criminal conviction, and it was pathetic. And that's not only that, but think about the federal government and illegal aliens. They no longer deport them. That's a real crime. Think about Antifa and BLM writers. They dropped their investigation. So you're expecting these entities that are already not convicting and arresting people who are guilty as hell of a real crime, where they can point out that that's the crime. But we're expecting the House GOP to exert pressure on these entities when they were not able to exert pressure on these entities when they had the executive branch and the Senate. But they're going to push them to arrest Twitter executives for shadow banning conservatives. I don't think that that's the serious motive. And so I'm not trying to single out Pedro here. I think this is, as shown by the wide amount of engagement of his posts, I think this is a view shared by a large part of the right. And I think, so it's not just him. I'm not singling out just him of this idea. I think this is a popular attitude where they just think that with the stroke of a pen, Republicans can build prison camps for libtards and deport all Hollywood execs. I don't know what they want to, but they just think that this is the way. And people just post on this and wow, that's so true. Why don't they do this? It's this isn't a serious party. And people don't understand that, making unserious demands that are just not going to happen. I mean, some people made the point, it's well, we have to make a maximalist demand so that they do something at all. But they're just not going to do something at all. So you're setting yourself up for disappointment. It's expecting, let's say you're an 8-year-old. And you're an 8-year-old and you expect your parents to turn you into Superman. This is your birthday wish. Your parents obviously cannot turn you into Superman. But you are so angry at them for failing to do this that you say that you are no longer my parents. I disown you. You are not serious parents for failing to uphold my wish. A lot of the demands I see from right-wing Twitter on Republicans are like that. It's expecting the fantasy, that fantasy must be created, otherwise we are no longer voting for you, which they're going to vote for them anyway. It's the same with the 8-year-old. The 8-year-old's still going to stay in his parents' house. There's several other analogies you can make there, but making these very unrealistic demands and then getting outraged by them, that's what it's setting up for, which is you see this constantly all the time. It's just a way of further blackpilling yourself and thinking that all is lost, and even totally dropping out of politics and letting your enemies control, because it's well, they were not able to arrest all drag queens and in the country. And the fact that House GOP couldn't do this, I just think that they're not serious. There's a wide discrepancy between what people online think the right can do and what they're actually capable of doing. As I'm using an example, we can't even deport illegal aliens. The Biden administration says unless you've committed a very, very serious crime, you're not being deported. And they can't even enforce the border. They can't even enforce laws at the border. They can't, arrest serious criminals in the urban areas. So there's there's a decline in law and order. And at the same time, when you come to right-wing Twitter, all these things can just be solved if Republicans read Carl Schmitt. I mean, people do actually legitimately say this. And I don't know how Carl Schmitt is going to create, once reading him, it's going to give you all that institutional power and all the will and like tons of competent staff to and launch an authoritarian dictatorship to restore Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. Which is a lot of I'm not saying that Pedro or some people like that, but you see that among some conservatives. Is like they want an authoritarian dictatorship just to restore Aunt Jemima. I don't know if it's like millions must die for us to have Aunt Jemima again. It's like the underlying presumption of some of these people you see online. And it's fine to post some of this stuff. I mean, it is what Twitter is, but I think it's just creating like a cycle of blackpilling. And it's not even like quite a radicalization because it's just tweeting. It does not come with real power behind it besides the person talking about the power. As I always want to say, the shredder attitude towards a lot of the new right of just like the power, we're taking the power. And then they're talking like these cartoon villains. And some of these guys say this is extremely popular. Like the real American people want this. And all the candidates who talked in this tone did not do very well in the election. And it's like I always want to mention is that people, want to look to DeSantis and say DeSantis is the future. But a lot of the Trump candidates who ran on similar messaging did not do well in the election. I'm not saying that that's something to be avoided, but it does negate the attitude that this is the reason why the GOP is losing is that they're not sounding like Shredder more often. I think if they sounded more like Shredder, we would see even worse results. Because the major issue with us is that the American people, our fundamental core is not that radical. They're not radical yet. And I think you would wish they were more radical. You wish they were more willing to change things. But when you're going into elections and what you can do, they are very easily upset by, this is not me complimenting them. This is more of a negative observations of them. But when you're attacking them or believing that they want this like authoritarianism and stuff, and really they just want to be, some degree of stability. They're very upset by crime. They don't really like the woke shit in their schools, but they're not for, revolution. They're not for that. And there's this underlying assumption among a lot of conservatives, even after the 2022 midterms, is that we're still in a revolutionary moment, that people are ready to national divorce and all this type of stuff. And really the ordinary person, they have concerns about crime. They have concerns about what's going on in their kids' schools, but they're not ready for that. They're still worried about their 401k. They're worried about their house payments. They're still stuck within the system, and they're also worried about their respectability. They're not these Bolsheviks in waiting. So in an electoral message, you have to reason with them where they are. You need to push them. You need to push them gently into the right direction of like, hey, maybe we need more changes than just, a little bit of a minor change that you want. But going full on, populist shredder mode, as what everyone thinks that the next Republican should be, people are going to check that. And I always say that, if we had the closest thing to right-wing Caesar we have is Trump. And if we had somebody went full on like using state power and stuff and like that, Trump was a little bit more circumspect about it than some people imagine he was. He was more into state power than the average Republican, but he was not going full on shredder mode. The people who would actually respond to shredder mode would be libtards if someone like Gavin Newsom was telling them, it's like, we are going to use the power of the federal government to arrest all racists. And they'd be like, woo! woo, yes, arrest the racist. Well, if you said something of that sort to Republicans, they would get nervous about that. It's like, oh, well, we can't arrest all the drag queens and stuff like that. Maybe I'll just vote Democrat this time. It's unfortunate that our herd is easily cowed, but they are what they are. And you have to, if you're running a campaign, you have to reason with them. I mean, if you're in political punditry and shit posting on Twitter, it's a different standard. But I think people want that translated as like what they're talking about on Twitter and translated into the real world. A more productive analysis of how power works would be about how we obtain power, and rather than wielding it in fantastical notions, which I always say that's like and I'm more focused on that. When I'm always telling people, it's like, hey, work hard in school, try to get good jobs, try to make yourself successful in the society, and build up your confidence. So when we have an administration, you can easily go in there and be suited to do positive changes in society, and looking at areas where we could exert a lot of influence, like getting into public management or bureaucracy and that type. People look down on that, but we do need more bureaucrats. Unfortunately, even though bureaucrats suck, it would be nice if we had more keyed bureaucrats. So I always look at it from that matter of how we can exert ourselves and create a counter elite to make positive changes. But I oftentimes see that people skip that process and imagine that we can immediately just wielding power like a Greek god once you get like the House GOP or something. Or you don't even need a House majority, because there was all these people when Republicans before the midterms didn't have the House, didn't have the Senate, didn't have the executive branch, and they're all demanding like, hey, Republicans, do something about this. Now on the state level they could do something, and Republicans did do that. Greg Abbott and DeSantis, even though I criticized DeSantis a lot, they did do some positive changes, but they're expecting like Republicans on a national level to immediately do something, and they're still expecting this. And I think it's just a way of blackpilling yourself, and then just like it's hopeless that they couldn't do something that's impossible to do. And I'm not singling out Pedro or his thing. I think that's just one tweet, and for that I agree with the sentiment that with Roth and Gad, I agree with putting them out of jail. If in a just society they would face serious consequences for their actions. Dorsey is another matter. I don't think Dorsey is just kind of a goober going on Buddhist retreats or whatever. So on the question of being serious, I think we have to look at things more realistically, pragmatically, and figure out how we can move the ball forward rather than wanting to adopt shredder populism and just thinking that that's the way to go. I think you need to tell people how they can adjust things and change things right now, are ways that they can have a path forward to doing that. I mean, we mocked the left for thinking the Grand Marshal of the Supreme Court could arrest and execute Steve Bannon. At the same time, we have a lot of serious people on the right who insist the Grand Marshal can do that against Anthony Fauci or whoever. There may be some, criminal things about Fauci or some sort, and it would be nice for these people to face consequences for their wrongdoing. But I am a little bit more realistic about what can be accomplished here. Some of that might be a black pill, but I think the one thing to avoid getting blackpilled is to avoid making unrealistic expectations and demands of what Republicans or whoever you place faith in can do, and to be realistic about what can happen and pragmatic, and just you should exert and demand that they do things. But from my perspective, I think, and for the House GOP, they have a limited amount of political capital. And one of the things that they need to focus on is increasing deportations of illegal aliens and investigating the Antifa BLM riots of 2020. And maybe we can get some criminal charges out of that. If we get criminal charges out of those riots, then we could focus on, maybe that shows some development, that maybe we can push for more things. But you have to start out at getting people who are clearly guilty of crimes. It's on camera. It's crimes that even a 4-year-old could realize that they committed something wrong and that that's illegal. once you get those people behind bars, then you can move on to bigger targets. And once you gain the type of power where you can do that, then you can move on to things. And I think a big problem with us is that a lot of people, yeah, and some of this is a way of, I think, a coping mechanism with dealing without having serious state power or this cultural power and institutional power that the left has, is that the right compensates for it by pretending that they have the power, and that on Twitter people can just tweet away at all their enemies being arrested and facing long jail terms for their many, many offenses, when it's in fact happening to us and we don't have that power yet. So it's a better focus needs to be about how to gain that power, and also focus on what we're for, and how to methods of appealing to the population to get them on our side. So, yeah, I think all criticism of the Twitter executives and the revelations coming from the Twitter files are there. But I think the bigger focus, if for Republicans in the House, needs to be focusing on the federal influence, because there they have a little bit more ability to make reforms. Some people even want to blackpill about that. And one thing is, the funny thing is that they'll make serious demands and they're like, they clearly won't do this. And then you're like, well, how about they do this? Like, they won't do that either. And it's like, okay, you just want to be blackpilled. I can't, I offer you a more realistic alternative. But the federal influence, I think, is the bigger deal. That these Twitter executives, you got to think of them as just patsies for, some FBI official or DOJ official, and you need to go after and expose those type of people, those who are wanting to censor the president of the United States, and go after that and try to reforms. I think that needs to be the focus, rather than trying to do citizens arrest, because if you're calling there for arrest and there's nobody to do it, you're expecting, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert to just go up to Yoel Roth and like, you're under citizen's arrest. And I don't know, maybe they'll take them to a Proud Boy prison. I don't know. I don't know where they would go, but that's essentially what you're demanding. So, and I don't think that's very serious. So that's my point on that. Moving along to what the House GOP can do, or the Republican or Congress can do, is there are 3 amnesty bills before the Senate. The Senate recesses, late next week. I think it's Wednesday or Thursday. And there's a limited amount of time, but they have 3 amnesties that they consider. One is a Dreamer amnesty that has been, a supposed compromise bill has emerged in the Senate, which the compromise bill, first off, you got to remember is that there were 2 amnesties passed last year and early last year, nearly a few, like a month or 2 after Biden was inaugurated. The 2 amnesties were, one was for the Dreamers. We call the Dreamers illegal aliens who came to the U.S. as minors. One thing to remember about the Dreamers can be widely variety in ages. So we imagine like, oh, they're just children. A lot of them are like in their 30s and 40s now, probably even older. It's like illegal immigration has been a big problem for well over 40 years. So you could have been like a 6-year-old brought here in 1984, and you are 44 years old, and yet you're a little a child dreamer who's just here wanting to, not be deported. So there's a wide variety. I think they may have changed the ages on them, but. Well, they're extending it, saying that the amnesty would be for 2 million illegals, which would likely mean more illegals than that. The 86 amnesty was supposed to be only for a little over 1 million illegal aliens, and it turned out that over 3 million illegals got amnesty. It would be the same if there was a grand amnesty where they gave it. They said, okay, 11 million illegals, you are able to stay. It's way more than 11 million. It's at least double that figure. It may even be triple that figure in this country. We really don't know. And they just stick to the 11 million because if they're saying like 20 million illegals, people would probably be worried. If illegals compromise, 6 or 7%, or maybe even I don't know if they're 10%, but maybe closer to 10% of the population, I think people would be like, what? People may be horrified by that. But they're like, most statistics put it at over 20 million. So it'd be probably more than 2 million that would get amnesty from that. So that's one. amnesty that was there. And then the second one was one for illegal alien agricultural people who work in the agricultural industry. They estimated it would be about 1 million illegals there, but once again, who knows? These bills pass, and then you find out the real number of people who get amnesty, and it's likely more than that. That bill is a little bit interesting. That bill is interesting because it forces the illegals to become indentured servants for a set number of years before they can get a green card, but they are legalized. Is that right now they're not legalized, and technically they'd be open to deportation, but obviously the Biden administration is not deporting anyone. But then they'd have an official legal status, and then they can work some number of years in the agriculture industry to gain a green card. So those are the two amnesties that were passed last year. They withered in the Senate, but they're trying to revive both of them right now. There's a compromise bill that they drew up. I'm using compromise in quotes because it's not a real compromise. That was agreed to by Tom Tillis and Kyrsten Sinema. I have to actually make a point about the Kyrsten Sinema news from last week, which all these conservatives were soy-jacking over her, like leaving the Democrat Party. She's like, she's bucking the Democrats. This is so great to have an independent. She is simply doing this to make her a stronger candidate in 2024 and to hold off and stifle a Democrat primary challenger, because she was going to have a serious Democrat primary challenge. I think it was going to be Ruben Gallego, who was like a powerful congressman influential congressman from Arizona, would be backed by a lot of people because a lot of Democrats hate Kyrsten Sinema. They think of her as too moderate, and they don't like her bucking the Democratic Party consensus, so they would go for Gallego. But now with her not saying, oh, I'm an independent, she now doesn't have to compete in the primary, and the Democrats have to decide whether they're going to run their own candidate against Sinema and, divide their vote and giving Republicans a victory, or, reluctantly support Sinema as their candidate who is caucusing with Democrats. The one thing is she's not a true independent. She's going to caucus with Democrats. So Democrats still maintain their majority. And she only did this because she saw that the 51-49 advantage that Democrats would control the majority no matter what she did, and she can just play around and be an independent. And, but she'll still caucus the Democrats. She's effectively a Democrat. She's just doing this to make herself a stronger candidate in 2024 and hold off a primary challenge. And even then, with her running as an independent in the 2024 Senate race would probably make her a stronger candidate in the general election based on the trajectory of what Arizona is, which is like super moderate, where it's just like, oh, we don't like Carrie Lake and Blake Masters because they're too extreme. And then they're like, oh, Sinema, she's a true independent. I'd have to look at her poll numbers in Arizona, but running as an independent, based on how stupid a lot of these swing voters are, that probably would play well with them. So I have no earthly idea why conservatives are sort of jacking over it and being like, this is so epic. It doesn't hurt their side. But that's my point on Sinema. That's a digression. But on another point, Tom Tillis is low-key probably one of the worst Republican senators. He is always trying to find ways to advocate for more immigration. Any type of immigration bill that's bad, whether it's increasing guest worker visas, whether it's, some form of amnesty, you can expect Tom Tillis to be involved in it. He's also just always been a moderator. He's like, we need to move on from being racist or whatever he says. He's one of those type of Republicans. I mean, a lot of people give grief to someone like Lindsey Graham, but Tillis is, in some ways worse than Lindsey Graham. So I would say he's one of the worst Republican senators, if not the worst. And he's always looking for an immigration thing. Finally did this. Now this bill, the House bills give Republicans no concessions. It's straight amnesty, nothing in return. The one thing on the agricultural amnesty, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, it does stipulate that these companies have to use E-Verify. E-Verify is done to ensure that they're not having illegal aliens on their staff. Big immigration hawk demand is to have mandatory E-Verify nationwide. That's it, but that's it. With the Dreamer bill, there's no border security, there's nothing. The Senate bill says that the House Republicans will get border security, increase in funding for border security and immigration enforcement. Just increase funding. No money for a wall, nothing specific that is going to protect this country from more illegal immigration. But that's it they get. In exchange, 2 million illegal aliens get amnesty. This isn't really a deal. I mean, first off, it's pretty basic that, we have to make deals to just get more funding for border security. Border security is at wit's ends. They don't have enough guys to enforce it. They spend all day processing illegals. There's incredibly low morale. And there should just be a straight bill that we're going to have more funding for border security and immigration enforcement because we're having a massive crisis. But the only way we can get funding for them is apparently to give amnesty to 2 million illegals. That's no deal at all. That's, that's something that's saying a basic function of the government. The only way we can do that is by rewarding lawbreakers. That doesn't make sense at all. And it should be remembered that when they've tried to do deals on the Dreamers before, especially when they've, DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the program that was supposed to give some of the Dreamers legalization. It's been bounced around whether it's still, around. Trump ended the program in 2017. Then a court said he couldn't, and then it's like sort of in dubious legal grounds at the moment. It's still there, but it's sort of in some type of purgatory, but it's still there. But they've always tried to do deals on this. But when they try to do deals on this when Trump was president, Democrats offered more realistic stuff, or they're saying like, we'll give you, or the type of deals that Republicans try to work out, we'll give you amnesty for 2 million illegals, but we get full funding for the wall, or we get all these other positive changes in immigration, we toughen, visa rules and all this type of stuff. There was like serious deals, and none of those worked. Now Republicans, the deal is like, this is a great deal. We get to fund a federal agency that is rapidly understaffed and should be funded on its own, and we give them more money in exchange for this. This is a great deal. No, it's not a deal at all. The bill should just simply be funding border security and immigration enforcement. That's it. No amnesty. That's a basic function of the government. And this is going back to like, if Republicans were serious, they would be pushing for that and not considering any type of amnesty. We need to set a lower bar for what they can do. And one of the bar requirements we should do is that they should just pass a straight more funding for Border Patrol bill, no amnesty included, and just force Democrats to vote on that. But apparently, the only way we can get funding for this type of thing. I mean, imagine if like the military was in war and we're trying to defund the military, and the only way we can fund the military is if we give amnesty to illegal aliens. Or that's like the type of mindset of this bill. So it's a terrible bill, and the farm workforce bill that they're trying to do in the Senate is no changes. There's nothing offered to Republicans except for more rewards for big businesses that are involved in this, and the rules are changed to greater favor of the businesses rather than illegal aliens. I don't think anybody listening to the show is going to care about that. So that's like those two bills. And then there's a third amnesty where they're trying to provide greater protection to migrants and foreigners who served in the armed forces who may face deportation. Now would be the bill that is being considered for that would make it far harder to deport any foreigner who's served in the American military from being deported. And even it will allow people who served in the American military and got deported for crimes to come back. So it is a type of amnesty. And it's a rewarding non-citizens to come back. And some of these people would now be technically illegal aliens due to the fact that they committed a crime and are facing deportation procedures. And so it would give a lot of leeway to the liberal bureaucrats to reward non-citizens who may have served in the armed forces. And so this is the House just passed that bill last week, but with minimal Republican support. The Republican support for these bills varies. There were 30 Republicans who voted for the farm workforce bill. Not surprising because that rewards corporations. There were 9 who voted for the new Dreamer Act in the House, and there were just 3 who voted for it the veteran amnesty, the veteran immigration bill last week. I think the veteran amnesty has no chance of passage. Republicans seem very opposed to that, much more so than the farm workforce bill and even the Dreamer bill. So I don't think that has any chance. I don't really think that there's much of a chance for any of these bills. They're facing, first off, the House GOP, even under Kevin McCarthy, there's a lot of problems with Kevin McCarthy, but Kevin McCarthy has said they're not going to pass any type of amnesty under his watch. I think he has to be committed to that because he's having to desperately plead with these House Freedom Caucus guys, these very conservative guys who are emphatically opposed to any type of amnesty, to support him for House Speaker. And I think he will maintain that promise because he's, he really is having to negotiate to be House Speaker. And I don't think Senate Republicans want to fuck him over by passing these amnesties and negating his pledge that he made. I don't think they want to do that. And I also think that a lot of these Republicans are worried about the backlash from their base if they pass amnesty while there's a major border crisis. And there's such an upswell of opposition towards Tom Tillis and his supposed compromise bill that I don't think that any of these things are going to pass. And there's a very limited time frame. This Congress ends in a week or so. And if they don't pass any of these bills, they have to go through the same process over again. And the House GOP is not going to allow these bills to pass. This is one thing I think you should be white-pilled about. Everyone wants to always be black-pilled, and that there's always going to be treachery and deceit at the same time that they're demanding the Kevin McCarthy build prison camps for libtards. They still think that these guys will fail in basic functions and will betray them and sell out the country to Joe Biden, which I think, for one thing, like a low bar that it is, I don't think that they're going to pass any type of amnesty in the next 2 years. They just have to ensure these bills die, and I'm pretty confident that they're going to die. I don't think there's not as much of a upsurge or real motivation to pass any of these type of bills. There's a few Republicans who want something to be passed. There's a number of Republicans who are retiring, who just don't give a shit about their voters anymore, who may pass these bills. I think there's 4 or 5 retiring Republican senators. But I just don't really see the drive there. This could change next week. I probably will talk about this topic next Monday because we'll see a better picture of it. I mean, next week is game time for all 3 of these bills. But I think by next week, the same dim prospects will still be there for all 3 of these bills. Democrats might not even want them. The Dreamer thing, I don't even think that there may be Democrats who will oppose that bill just because it increases funding for border security, which they don't want at all. They see that as inherently racist and fascist, so they might not even do that. Or there might not be enough Democrats to support that some Democrats may oppose it just for that reason. So I'm very optimistic that these bills will die, and I think my opinion on that will be confirmed next week. But we'll discuss this next week to discuss the prospects of how they look in the Congress. There may be no progress on any of these bills up until then, but we'll see. So we'll keep an eye on that for next week, the episode right before Christmas. So we'll keep you posted. The third topic I want to discuss today is the Brittany Greiner trade. I'm sure a lot of people were thrilled who are listening about the Greiner trade. We finally returned an American icon to our country from the barbarism of Russia. We made a fair trade of giving Russia an international arms dealer, Victor Bout, in exchange for a black lesbian basketball player who got arrested for weed. A very great trade. One of the best trades in world history. For Russia, at least. I mean, Russia got Bout back, who was like a serious national asset for them, especially with what they're trying to do in Ukraine to get weapons there and also spread their influence. He is a massive asset. Brittany Greiner was opposing the national anthem being played at WNBA games. And it's just a pothead lesbian black woman who is, before this arrest, people hardly even knew who she was. But we made that trade, and we left behind someone who is likely an intelligence asset, Paul Whelan, Paul Whelan, who is a former Marine, has kind of a little bit of a shady background, but it's typical for intelligence assets. I don't know if he's fully a CIA officer, and the CIA has denied it, but he was arrested in trying to this operation where he's trying to get information from somebody who was like a well-connected person with FSB. Likely some type of intelligence asset. He worked a security. He was a security operations officer for a corporation in Russia. Likely somebody who's dealing with intelligence. I would say it's fair to assume that he was some type of U.S. intelligence asset. What agency he was working for, the specifics of that, it's unclear. But in what he was arrested in, he was arrested for that. But he should still be returned. And apparently one of the things is that the reason why they didn't return Whelan is that Russia wanted some type of wanted a person that the media is describing as an assassin in exchange for them, and the U.S. government didn't want to make that. So they left Whelan behind and they took Greiner. There's also reports that they had a choice of whether it was Greiner or Whelan, and they chose Greiner. So this sets up an interesting debate over what America is about and what the type of situation we're in. If it's true that the administration was offered two choices of Greiner or Whelan, they obviously could not take Whelan here. I mean, they should, but they're not, because the media would be up in arms. They're like, this is white privilege and white supremacy in action. They left a poor black woman back in Russia to be oppressed by another white supremacist country. How could they do this? How could they live with themselves by letting Brittany Greiner suffer? And there's two factors there. Some people have had this debate whether it was just race involved or it was just that she was a celebrity. The real answer is both. It is that she's a celebrity, and it is also because of her identity politics, being black and gay. All those things played a role. So it's neither either or, it's both. And I mean, Paul Whelan, of course, is not a celebrity. He is not being, they're not superstar athletes and actors and politicians calling for his release. That's just the case for Greiner. And Russia had a serious advantage here with Victor Bout and Greiner, is because there was no Russian entertainment complex all being like, free Victor Bout, it's just the government. So there was no pressure campaign on them. While Brittany Greiner, ESPN was covering this all the time, alongside the mainstream media outlets, along with these athletes, they were constantly pushing for Greiner to be released. So there was more pressure on the Biden administration to make whatever deal could be had just to bring Greiner home to please their allies and critics. And Paul Whelan got left behind because, one, he is not a celebrity, and two, he's a white man. He looks like the bad old America. As I made this point on a Twitter account, is like, Brittany Greiner represents new America. Black, ambiguous gender identity. She has a very masculine voice. I listen to it, it's like, wow, is this a dude? There's been some speculation about that, but I will not get into that. She has a lot of tattoos, black or non-white. I think she's mixed of some sort. And lesbian, pothead. This is like the new America right here. Bizarre hairstyle. This is the new America. Paul Whelan, Marine, dresses a more conservative style, white man, looks like the villain from, if they're wanting to cast the evil middle-class white man, they would cast Paul Whelan as that. And he's just there, in his collared shirt. He's actually a Trump supporter, too. He announced that, I think on a Facebook post in 2016, that he was excited that Trump had won. It might have been even VContact VK actually post where he announced that he was supporting Trump. Or he was excited that Trump won in 2016. So he's a conservative white guy, Marine background. He represents the bad old America. Brittany Greiner represents the new great America. So they're going to leave bad old America behind there, even though he's an actual intelligence asset, or likely an intelligence asset for the federal government. Greiner matters more than him. And Greiner can come back and kneel for the national anthem and talk about how America is a white supremacist country, and they all can agree with that. But there's one motivation underlying motivation for why Greiner had to be brought back. And this was delivered by CNN commentator Van Jones. This is, I think, actually true. And it does show that there was a great account that he's gone away, but he's Akbolga, or he went through a bunch of different handles where he argued that America is a black ethno state. And the comments from Van Jones really give further evidence for that. So I'll read Van Jones's comments. Now, Jones considers Greiner an icon, and he said she was treated like garbage, and this is why they had to rescue her, because she's an icon. I guarantee you, this is Jones speaking, so quote, I guarantee you there will be young people 10, 20, 30 years from now who will remember this moment because she is an icon. It's really, really extraordinary, and people are talking about this other guy. He's referring to Paul Whelan. He's actually talking about Victor Bout. He's so terrible. Look, there's a lot of terrible people in the world, a lot of terrible people in Russia. What you can't allow to happen is have a black female icon treated like garbage and America do nothing about it. Something was done about it, and people are going to be proud of that. He further adds, also give credit to black women. Black women rallied for this, fought for this. It took some of the male athletes were getting jammed up. If this was LeBron James, you guys would be shutting down everything. And the male athletes said you are correct. This was a galvanized grassroots movement led by black women that brought in the White House, the U.S. government, to rescue a sister from injustice. You think about other black women who you've seen in handcuffs, Angela Davis, like those images emerging triumphant. That's this today, a black woman who is chained, shackled, mistreated, emerging triumphant. And that's what he says. And he said, when she lands today, it's going to have the eyes of planet Earth on her. Well, that was true. So that's going back, is like the American foreign policy is defined by this. What you can't allow to happen is to have a black female icon treated like garbage and America do nothing about it. This is a foreign policy imperative. If a black person is mistreated anywhere throughout the world, if it's an icon, we have to act. Fuck you, white guy. Fuck you, white Marine, who actually was working for the federal government, actually doing stuff for you. We don't give a shit about you. We care. The American foreign policy directives depend on rescuing black female icons. So this is very much of like American civilization at this point, because I've had some debates on and discussions with some people over on Twitter and in conversations about like what American civilization is. And you really want to look at, and some people are like saying, oh, there's going to be a new primal American culture emerging from the ruins of the empire, and it's going to be really based. And really, in fact, it's just like Brittany Greiner, Lil Pump. It's this, it's really what we're seeing from the rap scene. And it's this like intermingling between the peoples, all the various peoples here. And it's creating something that is complete garbage and decay and degenerate. That's like the young primal culture. It's something more represented by somebody like Brittany Greiner than anyone that we would say is based. And this is now how American foreign policy dictates. And so and we've had like American citizens who've been detained by various countries over the time, been detained in North Korea. There was a Warmbier, I think that was his name, Warmbier, who people actually attacked. He actually died in North Korean custody. He was an American college student, very like waspy looking guy, very Chad looking guy, tall guy, good looking guy, and he died in North Korean custody. And all these liberals like serves him right for going to North Korea. And it's like, why are we wasting effort on him? Now imagine if it's a black woman in North Korea. Why a black woman would go to North Korea? I don't know, but that would be good content regardless. And imagine if she's in custody. Dude, we would like declare war on North Korea to get a black woman back. But this white guy, we had a lot of prominent people. It's like, sucks to suck, entitled white guy, for going there, and he died in prison. And a lot of people mocked his family just because he represented this like a wasp Chad from an 80s comedy movie, the villain. And so they didn't give a shit about him. And there's been white people like arrested in other places. And generally, if it's a white person, like, oh, sucks to suck, unless it's a white woman and it's like ISIS. But sometimes they'd be like, this is white privilege in action, that we care about Warmbier rather than, the black people here. And Otto Warmbier was his name. Very, very Germanic name. It might be Otto Warmbier. But that's his name. But he represented the bad, evil whiteness. And it's like the same with Wayland. Like, people aren't going to get that concerned about Wayland. I mean, he's been in prison for almost 4 years now. I mean, coming up into early next year. I think he got arrested in January 2019. So he's been there for 4 years, and they just don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. I mean, but he had to be a black person for them to care. I mean, Greiner got a lot more attention because she is a professional athlete. But even if it was if Wayland was black, they would care a lot more about him, and they probably would have brought him home much earlier. It's just how the directives have been. I mean, Biden's been there since 2021. They would have made it a big promise to bring back Paul Wayland if he was black. So that's just how American civilization works and how our culture is. It prioritizes blacks over whites, which goes back to my article I wrote in response to Richard Hanania talking about how conservatism is the new ghetto culture. And he argued that blacks are actually low status, which is just not the case. Like, they have a greater high status in this role of American foreign policy. You know, foreign policy, we go over and we say America's built on white supremacy, and we display Black Lives Matter flags, and we say you cannot mistreat a black female icon. That does not indicate blacks are low status in this country. And we put up statues to George Floyd and treat George Floyd like a religious saint. So the real, it's closer to the fact that this argument, which I don't fully agree with, but it's an interesting way of looking at modern America, is that modern America operates as a black ethno state. And you can see this coming from the Greiner case, and this is why Paul Wayland wasn't released. So those are my thoughts on that. And a final thought I actually want to mention, because some people got a little controversial about this tweet. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Watch me talk about this for 20 minutes, but I'm not going to talk about this for 20 minutes. I saw a post of, there was this guy, academic agent, who has some interesting videos, podcaster. He's on Twitter. I follow him. Sometimes I don't agree with him on everything, but he's an interesting guy. He's one of us. I think it was supposed to be a reveal, and his real name is Nima Parvini. He's half Persian. And I saw this. He was speaking at a right-wing British group, Traditional Britain group, I believe it was. I quote tweeted about this idea because there's so many people I'm meeting, both in real life and on Twitter, who exist at the fringes of whiteness that I would say this controversial. Parvini himself is half Persian, half British. He looks white. I mean, you could see like some Greeks and some Sicilians who you might be a little bit worried about, but you know, he looks white. He considers himself white. I would say he's white. He identifies with European culture. The difference is he's an outsider prior to what traditional Britain is that he's doesn't have an Anglo-Saxon name, has Persian heritage, has this immigrant heritage. I know some other people who are like half like that, and they don't fully fit in to the historic British framework, but they still identify and support with it. And I think that there is like a huge, there's a disproportionate amount of people within our side. I'm not saying this is good or bad, who come from the fringes of whiteness. You know, people who, a lot of Hispanics, a lot of, there's a number of Armenians and Persians involved, and there's even some Hapas. There's a lot of different people in there. Some people like to overemphasize, like, oh, there's so much diversity in this. But a lot of these people are coming from, or would be considered outsiders to Americans, or at least like kind of WASP America. That there's not as many WASPs among the dissident right as you would think. And I think that there's a point to this. I'm not saying that like it's all minorities. I'm just saying that it is more minorities than you would think for a movement that is race realist, so to speak. So there's a lot of people identifying with this stuff. And I think a real reason that they identify this is that it's easier for outsiders to identify a lot of the absurdities that go on in our society than it is for insiders. And a lot of insiders are still rewarded. Like the life for middle class whites in America is still pretty good. Yes, there are pressure points. Yes, there are things that are different. Yes, there are things that are going wrong. And maybe it's harder for them to get the job they want because they're white. And there are changes going on. It's not pitch perfect. It's not perfect. But for largely and historically, it's still pretty good. And if you're a white guy who maybe is not that, who has not really come in contact with this stuff, maybe they see this stuff on the news, maybe they see some wrong things, like, oh, well, that's kind of bad. But at the end of the day, middle class white guy, likely has a stable job, likely has some aspirations, has a good looking girlfriend or wife. Maybe not a good looking girlfriend or wife, but he's like focused on that. He's got a sports team to watch on the weekend. He's got his friends to do, or friends to hang out with, and he's focused in on his own life, which, he's maybe got a nice house and other things. So he's got those focuses on him. Now, there are some people who have like everything going well for them. It's always gone well for them. And just someday, maybe some incident wakes them up. Maybe there was like a really violent break-in in the neighborhood, and they saw that like how police dealt with it because of the color of this people's skin, or maybe there's something that happens in their kid's school. There's a lot of things, or maybe they get denied a promotion because of the race. There's a lot of things that can set them off, but those people probably haven't really thought about these issues throughout their life, and it's like becomes a gradual realization for them. But for people who are outsiders, they've clearly understood these facts for a long time, and they've wondered why people agree with it. But if you're an insider, you're just like, that's the way things are. It is what it is. I'm turning on the game, and that's what I'm focused on, or I'm focused on, accumulating or furthering my career. I don't have time for politics. Well, I think outsiders, they can still do all that stuff, but they recognize a lot of these things. And even a lot of these like liberal immigrants, especially among Indians, like they have a real racial awareness, much more so than like the stereotypical middle class WASP. I mean, WASP, like white Americans are like some of the least racially aware human beings on planet Earth. And this is the same in the UK and other Anglosphere countries, especially in Canada. And so they just like deny this, and they'll refuse to see it. And even if they may think that there's something there, they'll keep it to themselves because they don't want to have the consequences. And that's going to prevent them from the fun hobbies and the hot wife and the great career that if they ask any questions about this. So when you're an insider, you're less likely, and you're getting rewarded by being in that society. And still, to a certain extent, middle-class whites are being rewarded and have a nice life in this society for now. You're not going to question it. But if you're, coming at it from someone who's like an outsider who, doesn't have these set, platitudes and norms and dogmas set into them by their family and by, their parents having the propaganda and their grandparents having the propaganda, and they're just approaching this from fresh set of eyes and how their own country operated, they're more likely to see the absurdities in our society and question them. Now, sometimes they may just question them and see the absurdities and go to the left and weaponize it for their own gain, and sometimes they'll go to the right to try to fix these things. So it is an interesting conundrum. I just think it's like, well, let me take a step back. I think that sometimes, and this is found both on the far right and far left Twitter, is that everyone pretends that they were a varsity football player, extremely popular Chad guy, and then they adopted like some of the fringes like internet politics there are. It's really absurd for the left because like every irony leftist pretends they were a high school athletic star and total Chad with tons of girlfriends, and somehow it ended up them being a pot smoking fail son Bernie bro, which doesn't make sense. And even for the right, it's like I was totally I was a star quarterback on my football team, and that's why I became an Evolian Habsburg Restorationist National Bolshevik. And you're like, I don't think that's what the star high school quarterback gets into. So people are able to create these identities and perceptions of themselves on that. But I think in a lot of cases, as the dissident right name implies, it's an outsider movement. It's people who see things, and some of them may be having the success of the insiders, but there is a type of lack of being a normie, is that they can recognize these things. Because normies, unless it's like directly confronting them and like there's a major shock to them, they're usually not going to recognize these realities. It takes a set of outsider eyes to realize them. And so sometimes it may be somebody from an immigrant background, or maybe somebody who was not the varsity football player, varsity star, popular kid who recognizes this stuff. But it is what it is, and it's just something worth noting, and I think it's interesting. But that's it for the regular topics. Now on to Conflict questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Kind of Elite option at Highly Respected's Substack, and that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements if you haven't already. This question comes from James, and it's another music question and a metal question, so I'm very happy about this. And so he's talking about, he loves my very high IQ takes, as everyone should. So he has two questions. First, what is your opinion of Winter Sun's self-titled album? And Winter Sun is a very technical, symphonic, melodic death metal band. And these are a lot of adjectives to put on a band. Essentially, they're power metal, more aggressive power metal with harsh vocals. They're very similar to Insufferum, if you guys have heard of Insufferum. Some similarities to Children of Bodom and bands like In Flames and stuff, but it's a little bit of different style. If you guys are familiar with that, and they're from Finland. They were initially a side project of Insufferum, if you guys have heard of them. I think some of our listeners are aware of them, but it's like very technical, a lot of guitar heroics in the music. I think it's all right. I occasionally listen to Winter Sun's self-titled album. It's got some bangers on there, but it's not so much my cup of tea. It is a little goofy and cheesy, sometimes a little goofy and cheesy for my take, and I think it's a little too much on guitar wankery that's going on. It's too much impressing. It's like, whoa! I think it's like one big problem with some people's perceptions of metal albums. It's like about how technical and like this guitar wizardry and technical wizardry going on in the music playing, that people just get impressed by, and they ignore the melodies and the songwriting and the feeling of the music, and it just becomes an exercise and just like see how well it can play. I think Winter Sun avoids that for the most part and still creates an enjoyable music, but it's not so much my cup of tea. I would say it's all right. It's not my favorite stuff. I prefer the less goofy or cheesy stuff than that, but it's enjoyable. It's at times I'm not gonna say it's bad. It's listenable, and there's some good songs on that album. I think it's probably their best album that they've released. So that's the first question. The second question also is sort of similar answer to that. It's like, second, why do many metalheads hate Dream Theater, and do you think the hate is justified? I think most people should know who Dream Theater is. They are the progressive metal band, and they had some hits in the 90s, mainly Pull Me Under, which was from Images and Words. I'm pretty sure that's the album. That album was from 1992. I was about to imitate the song chorus, but I decided against it. I don't want to destroy your people. I don't want to destroy people's ears. I can do a great Eddie Vedder impersonation and some of these grunge singers, but I don't know if I should attempt to do these very high-pitched, very skilled heavy metal singers. But the reason why Dream Theater is hated is they're seen as like a pussy band. I mean, it's like, they got the high-pitched vocals. They've got, even just the sound, it sounds like a softy metal, and they're also a band that is really guilty of musical wankery. It's like they're like, whoa, just check out this guitar solo. How did he do that? And it's like, wow, the vocals, like, how does he reach that high? And it's like a lot of their music is just an exercise in just showing how well they can play their music. And a lot of it is like very goofy and cheesy. Just like the melodies they use and just like the hooks they have, you're like, oh man, this isn't the type of serious stuff like a Burzum or a Morbid Angel or something of that sort, that people would want to listen to. I wouldn't say that they're terrible. Like, if I heard like a Dream Theater song, I'm not like, this sucks. I'm not going to say that. I'm like, oh, well, this is okay. Like their old stuff. But something I would actively go out of my way to listen to, I would not say that it is for Dream Theater. But the reason they just like hate it is that they're just seen as like pussy metal, as like, not in like a way of like trying to win over women, but it's just like, this is wimpy stuff. This is not the real hard stuff. This is just like softball metal. And I think it's also the fact that they were like music students and studied it in college and their backgrounds. It makes them not have that kind of hard reputation of like other metal bands. So that's like something that they do. I would say it's somewhat justified, even though I would not say that they're one of the worst bands out there. And Pull Me Under is not a terrible song. And so there are other songs that they try to do as more radio friendly and not being total musical masturbation that they're usually trying to do. But so I would not say that they're terrible. But in comparison between Winter Sun and Dream Theater, I would say Winter Sun, I would actively, one day I'd be like, oh, I'm going to listen to Winter Sun. I'd probably not do that with Dream Theater. But neither one of those bands would I try to include in my music library. So that's like the standards I have. Is like, would I, once in a blue moon, listen to them and, actively seek them out? I'd probably say that standard is reached for Winter Sun, but in the high standard of including it in my music library, I would not say. So those are my thoughts on that. And I like giving music takes. I like the questions. I know some listeners don't like this. I don't know if I've answered them in the best way here with both bands. I think they're worth listening. I actually have to follow up on my question from last week. Somebody asking about new metal albums that are new Metallica albums that were coming out and my thoughts on it. And actually, I did get to listen to their new track and also Hardwired to Self-Destruct, which I had never really listened to. And even I gave a listen to Death Magnetic. And I thought Hardwired to Self-Destruct was okay. I actually did not like Death Magnetic. It was much worse than before. And then even the new track that they have out, which actually is like escaping my mind at the moment. But you can look it up, new Metallica track on YouTube or wherever you listen to music, and you find it. And with all this music, I think that a crucial difference between it's really trying to go back to the 80s. And Hardwired to Self-Destruct and even the new track, there's a certain new wave of British heavy metal atmosphere to it, almost Kill 'Em All atmosphere, and stylings that they're using, and some even like Iron Maiden harmonics going on. Guitar harmonies that are being worked in there. But one thing I found with the music is that, one, it's all vocally driven. It's all dependent on James Hetfield's voice, much more so than their 80s music was. It's all like musically, all centered on his vocals, and the vocals are driving the music, and that's really providing a lot of the hook into the listener, which I don't think is like a good thing. I would not say there's like a positive quality in the music. It's like most of the metal I prefer is the less vocally driven music, which is mostly black and death metal. Obviously, it's like harsh vocals, so it's depending on more of the guitar work to lead the effort rather than the vocals. And I found that was like one case is that, there's like some interesting things going on in the background, but it's all just on Hetfield's voice that is supposed to drive the listener's attention. And the music itself, and I found this more with Hardwired to Self-Destruct, and this is like appropriate for all. I don't know I think their new album's going to go with shorter songs, but the songs are too long because it worked for their 80s album because there's a mixture of what is leading the music, whether it's vocals or the music or the guitar work. And the guitar work is a greater driving force in their old 80s stuff. And there's a lot more stuff going on in the music. So it's worth it if you have an 8-minute song. But if you're having an 8-minute song that's all centered around Hetfield's vocals, it's a drain. So it would have been better with shorter music. But I think overall, the bigger problem is that they're in their 50s. They're now about to hit their 60s, and it's hard playing that stuff the older you get, and a lot of the creativity is dried out. And they're one of the biggest rock bands in the world, so they're not going to do as ambitious stuff that they were doing in the 80s. It's actually good. I mean, they tried to do that with that shitty Lulu album that they did with Lou Reed, but I feel sorry for those like people who bought that album thinking it's going to be another Black album. So in conclusion, I would say they're, at least for that last album they put out, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, it was okay. I guess the newer album, I found in the new track, it's even more classic rock, hard rock influenced. And by like traditional like 70s stuff than even the 2016 album. So I might give it a listen. It's not terrible putting it on, but it does not reach the standard that they set with their 80s albums. So that's my conclusion on that. And that's it for today's episode of Highly Respected. I know there's probably going to be a lot of critics of people spending any amount of time talking about heavy metal music, but we're going to not listen to them regardless. So that's it for today. We're going to have an incredible IQ supplement later this week, so tune in for that. So until next time, stay respected.